So this morning for our Boardroom Bites at 9, we've got a very interesting topic and one that I don't think we've really done before. And we've got Dionne as our speaker for this morning, and she's talking about the alignment of BEE and sustainability. Dionne is the founder and CEO of Siyakha Consulting, and she's got extensive experience. She's been a key contributor in the fields of transformation, development, and strategy from, I think, 1998. So she's got a wealth of knowledge and experience in this space. So we're really looking forward to hearing from you and to take us through, how do we as organizations and boards look at BEE and sustainability, where we're going wrong, what do we need to improve on? So Dionne, I'm going to hand over to you. I'm going to give you remote control as well now, and I'll see you guys a bit later in the session.
Thanks very much, Vicky. Good morning, everybody. And I know that we have a small amount of time to discuss this enormous topic this morning, so I will jump right in and make sure that we try and get through the content as quickly as we can. I think that in the conversation about South Africa, the dilemma of South Africa, and specifically the broad-based Black economic empowerment legislation, the first thing that we need to talk about, of course, is the terrible name. The name Black economic empowerment in some countries would not only be offensive, but probably criminal in respects of its intentions. And I think that inadvertently what happens when we talk about Black economic empowerment is that there are significant negative connotations around it. So this morning, I'm hoping we can talk a little bit about the positives, the opportunities that persist, and most importantly, the role as directors that we have in being able to drive this important transformation strategy forward. Okay, sorry, from my side, I can't see that the slides are moving, but I will carry on and press it again. Vikeshni, perhaps you might need to take over. My apologies.
Okay, I'll just help you here for a second. I think it's waiting for you to take control of my screen.
Thank you. Okay, so I think that the messaging in South Africa today, which we're all acutely aware of, is we're bombarded with information about wage negotiations and unions uprising and communities feeling the burn post-COVID and pre-COVID of an economic downturn, the prioritization of youth, making sure that we include women in all of our conversations, poverty alleviation, which is obviously abundantly clear that is all of our problem, and the need to address job creation and ESG at the same time. It's a very complex mix when in the middle of it, our priority as a business might be to manufacture a gadget at the lowest possible price and make sure that it's delivered to client. Today, we're going to talk about BEE and how all of those different facets kind of come together as one, and how do we implement all of this, mindful of the requirements of BEE and transformation and what is expected. Okay, so in respect of broad-based Black economic empowerment, our policies on BEE are quite far-reaching. I mean, I guess it was quite aspirational that at the time that they developed the policy, they thought that 184 pages or whatever it is could consider every eventuality in government, every possibility in government. So it's extremely far-reaching. Added to that, we have a verification manual that really does okay, sorry, we've jumped to the end of the presentation. That really does give one or two examples in terms of how it's measured, and that probably doesn't do justice to the intention. The level of understanding of BEE itself within government is a problem as well, in that most of the 9,000 odd procurement officers at a government level are not fully trained or competent. We use words like the individual was a BEE individual. I mean, there is no such thing. It's a piece of legislation. That's like saying that the individual was a SARS individual, and a similar kind of requirement. So I think that the policies of broad-based Black economic empowerment have got some things right. Our review in 2012 of the presidency, sorry, let's just address this presentation. And make sure that we are not distracted by that. Okay, I think, let me give up the remote control. Vicky, I've given you back the remote control. If I can hand it back to you, please, that would be
No
great.
problem. There we go. Here's the.
So our research for the Presidential Review Commission in 2012 showed that 9 out of the 512 state-owned companies in South Africa had some level of BEE compliance. Apparently, government didn't get the memo when we decided it was a national imperative, and the legislation in the Act was adjusted to say that state-owned enterprises and public enterprises must comply with BEE, as should any business doing business with one of those entities, and as should any business doing business with a business doing business with one of those entities. And so the Act was amended in order to ensure that everybody understood how important it was that we get it right. And the impact that we've seen is quite significant. The expenditure with SMMEs over a 3-year period moved from 6% to 28%. We've seen a huge shift in employment equity policies and the inclusion of people across all demographics, ages, and specific geographics as well. The investment in skills development in South Africa is significant. It's one of the highest in the world, with huge government incentives, rebates, and grants available for those people who do it well and do it right, with an emphasis on job creation. And finally, through the persistence of time, we have started to see businesses starting to innovate within their BEE strategies and really realize at an executive level that the model can achieve very powerful things. Thank you. So in terms of where it goes wrong and how BEE goes wrong, BEE deals do not fail. We talk about, these bad BEE deals, and all BEE deals fall apart. The governance, the scrutiny, the commercial rationale around these deals has to be brought into question. As directors, we slap each other on the back and say, great deal. And when it falls apart, we say BEE was a terrible thing. But the lawyers that advise, the accountants that crunch the numbers, the investment bankers that structure the funding on it, we all need to take cognizance of the fact that nowhere in BEE does it ask us to set aside strong commercial rationale and what is good in business. BEE is not a tax. If a board of directors have responsibility in any other discipline to spend 4% of their net profit after tax and 6% of their basic leviable payroll and be accountable for the impact that that makes, then we would sincerely apply our minds to making sure that there is strong commercial return and that it's done in such a way where there's traceability and scrutiny. Only in the name of BEE do we make these decisions without applying our minds in the same way. We've encouraged SMME inclusion, but we failed to pay SMMEs in time. One of the SARS reports showed that 5 out of 7 SMMEs fail in any given year, costing not only the taxpayer, but the cost of liquidating these entities and deregistering them and taking them off our supply chains. One of the state-owned businesses that we work with, there was a 19-month lag on tender execution and delivery because the small businesses weren't paid on time and then fell over during the process. And in accordance with their tender requirements, the entire tender has to go back to tender. So the inefficiencies that are created through application of BEE, not so much in the policy, but in the application and how we implement it, and possibly our lack of authenticity in how we deliver programs of this nature. People with disabilities, I often walk into a corporate environment and they show me where the people with disabilities sit, because they're in a separate area of the building. That's not inclusion. Yes, you're showcasing your notion of diversity, but it's not inclusion until those people feel meaningfully included. And it's estimated that around 10% of our current employees are living with some form of disability and haven't disclosed because they don't trust that there is no prejudice as a result of that disclosure. And many companies went backwards or simply failed to perform during COVID. And really what that means is that it has not yet become our ethos. It isn't our operating ethic and how we do business yet. It is something that somebody gets tasked with doing and measuring once a year. And until such time as it becomes our ethos, we really will struggle to realize the right commercial returns in that regard. Thank you. So if unemployment remains consistently high, and the investment in skills development is enormous, then something's wrong. We're throwing this money at enterprise and supply development, an estimated 41 billion rand. We've got masses of amounts of money being invested in skills development and learning, and huge errors in the way in which it's implemented. But our corporate citizenry and activism around developing the right solutions doesn't yet seem to be aligned. Youth today have significant challenges. We are all aware and blatantly aware of the fact that we have one of the largest youth populations in the world and one of the highest youth unemployment rates in the world. And we know that the risk that we run is that when you were 21 and exuberant and felt that you could take on the world and nobody could tell you what to do because you knew everything, some of us might still be there, but at 21, it's particularly bad. When we were in that situation, the risk that we run is the despondency and the hopelessness and the disenfranchisement with what is society might push youth to radical behavior. And so inadvertently, we create our biggest risk in running businesses in South Africa if we don't actively participate in identifying those solutions. 49% of year one bursary students in a dropout rate, not because they're not coping, not because they're not smart, but because we pluck a child out of a rural community, we ignore the social dynamic that says that he should stay home and provide for his family, and we put him into the middle of WITS or UCT, and we ask him to socialize, and we ask him to naturalize within that environment. Well, 38% of classes are done using social media and laptops, and the kids need to look the same and socialize in the same way. But this child has to hold down 3 jobs and attend classes in arrears that he can ill afford because our bursaries are not structured correctly. We prioritize and we award volume and not quality of learning and development and infrastructure. And these kids graduate into unemployment, and that's our current reality. Why couldn't we change the model? Why couldn't we decide that all universities, and they've proven that they can, could provide online learning as they did during COVID, so that we could expand the number of students that have access to quality learning and education? Why couldn't we stop this excessive investment into physical structures of university and really make sure that the universities that do exist have the best quality investment and priority that we can possibly give them? Take school leavers, adjust our working week from 45 hours a week to 20 hours a week, and allow school leavers to work on 4-year study apprenticeships, so that at the end of 4 years they've got great work experience and a qualification, and we can meaningfully put them back into our economy in order to be able to be employable. And that's the best gift you can give somebody, is the opportunity to have work experience and a qualification and the earnings and retain their dignity at the same time as a meaningful participant in society. Thank you. So in terms of diversity targets, women on boards, so often I see women on boards who say, well, we don't attend all the board meetings, we only attend some of the board meetings. What we're doing is we're setting targets to address board visibility as opposed to real diversity or representation. Target setting for the inclusion of women employees has happened without consideration for the environment that we put them into. There are so many stories that we've experienced in rail where we trained women engineers to be train drivers and who stepped off the train with almost 100% incidences of abuse on those railway lines because men were lying in waiting for them. Women retail store owners who were locking up the store at night, who were prevalent to a much higher incidences of attack. Sexual abuse in the mine shafts, when we put women down a mine shaft without providing the right ablutions. So we need to design solutions authentically. We need to include people authentically. We need to stop this overemphasis on race and target setting and record keeping and scorecards, and focus more on, are we providing an environment at work where every single human that we employ can meet their highest potential? The process of inclusion is very different to setting targets and ticking boxes. We've included women with huge targets for women-owned businesses in terms of SMMEs. And so what's happened? The wives have become the shareholders. They're not meaningfully included. In fact, they're robbed of their dreams and their ability to drive their own objectives because they've become their husband's business owner for the purposes of tenders, and they come under scrutiny with significant commercial risk and compliance risk if that is found out. So we put ownership transactions together and SPVs in a matter of weeks, and anybody who studied audit or board governance knows that you need to be able to properly date before you're walking down the aisle. And we're skipping the processes of good governance in order to meet targets that are not necessarily sincere and not necessarily authentic, and hurting the very people that we set out to include and develop along the way. Thank you. In terms of, thank you, men, and this is something I feel so passionately about. When we spoke to, and I see that Marikana has again got some issues that have come up this morning, but our research that we did when the initial Marikana travesty happened was that African men felt that they were not white enough previously under the previous regime, and under the current regime felt that they were not women enough. This is a problem if we take a look at our societal structures, and the reality is that that is what makes South Africa beautiful, is the richness of its diversity. If we take our societal structures and the way in which they work, men have a very important and crucial role. It doesn't mean that it needs to happen at the price of women, but they have a very important and crucial role to play as the head of the family. And I think sometimes we forget this in our policy making and our target setting. We forget the importance of making sure that people have the right to retain their dignity in the way in which we implement these targets of diversity. The dialogue of targeted diversity could well be discriminatory. I know that's not our intention, but it could well be discriminatory in that certain sectors of society no longer feel good enough. And I think particularly for African men, this is a dilemma. And we're going to see that this leads to, again, significant social unrest. So we've got youth feeling disenfranchised, and we've got African men feeling that in many instances they're robbed of their dignity in the way in which these targets are set. One of the most important things we can do as board directors is create an environment for our businesses to succeed in. And some of that means that we need to prioritize social stability. It's a key risk for any business, particularly in South Africa, and it should be an area for board accountability where we are responsible for saying, are we a trigger for social instability, and or are we making sure that we are an advocate and or a participant in creating social stability in the environments in which we operate? And we need to make sure that we're in a position where, wherever possible, we minimize that risk. And a lot of that risk comes from distrust. The very same reasons that we've heard around the tables of mining houses and big agricultural concerns, we're not going to tell the community that because it might create a problem. It's the very same reason why communities distrust what they are told. And so if we want to start to address these issues, we have to be opening up dialogue, and we have to be creating a sincere platform for us to be able to engage with the communities that are impacted by the work that we do. Thank you. In terms of SMMEs funding and finance, I see that there's been a recent announcement in the last week or two that government has addressed the adjustment of the SMME funding and finance models. There are significant challenges we need to consider. Women-owned businesses, as an example, because of the hierarchical structure and our cultural norms, as we've discussed, many individuals are married in community of property. They cannot take decisions without their husband, and therefore they have a lack of assets. They have a lack of ability to provide any form of surety or collateral in order to loan against. So they really are trapped in this environment where they're dependent on the men in their lives in order to make sure that they have adequate access to funding. For the women vendors that we see on the side of the road, they run very successful businesses, but the incidence of theft is significant. They're robbed at least 3 times a week. They're threatened, quite literally physically threatened in those many days a week. How do we create an environment where we're trying to stimulate women-owned SMMEs when in fact the forces are working against them? During COVID, with SMME funding, only 18% of the applications that we lodged for SMMEs in order to access funding were approved. The average processing time for SMME funding in South Africa is a minimum of 9 months. SMMEs go into bankruptcy or liquidation or fall apart within a matter of days and weeks. First of all, because they haven't been paid. The average SOC taking 90 days from date of statement to pay. We can't ask SMMEs to fund our government. We can't ask SMMEs to fund our largest infrastructure projects. We need to find sincere and meaningful ways to fund SMMEs that consider the SMME environment. The highest interest rates and the most prescriptive terms on lending are given to those SMMEs, apparently because they're high risk. But we also argue the fact that by 2030, we're hoping that SMMEs will be in a position where they can provide 90% of South Africa's needs on job creation. Somewhere, the model that we have for assessment of credit, somewhere the model we have for allocation of funding, and somewhere where we authentically suggest that we are going to support the SMME development market, there is a gap. If we're going to be intentional around our role in taking South Africa through the trajectory that we have to go through in the next 20 to 30 years, then we need to start to shift our thinking, shift our models, and really apply our minds to how we do things differently. Corporate offtake is exceptionally powerful. If the financial institutions came together, and they are under their BE code required to provide SMME funding and preferential terms, if they came together with corporate South Africa in order to leverage corporate offtake as a means to provide structured financing against contracts and availability for SMMEs, I'm sure that we could probably come up with solutions. And we would need to include the very SMMEs that are applying for that funding so that we can hear their voice and understand their issues and design something with their consultation in mind. Thank you. Our cultural considerations for wealth: 24% of South African households are child-headed, and the majority are headed by women who are currently earning less than men. The earnings potential of employed women is significantly lower than men. And we still have a proliferation of gogos who are looking after the children with disabilities and are the ones who go and stand in the queue for social services grants. Women's role in developing young men needs to be understood and recognized. It's as important for women to be in the workplace as it is for women to be recognized as mothers and as the guiders and peers of our next population or and the next era of South Africans that are coming through those ranks. The cultural norms and the pressure on familial structures and the erosion of wealth, this notion of black tax, and there are so many people that I discuss about it where the parents say, well, you'll provide for us first before you'll provide for yourself. So essentially what we're doing is we're perpetuating the cycle of poverty in that the young generation coming up are not in a position to invest in bonds and be able to own homes and start to build assets because they have to spread the wealth. And there is insufficient, I'm not saying there isn't any, but there is insufficient education. And I'm talking about real education, not financial education because I'm trying to sell you a product, but authentic education around what is the real cost of buying a lottery ticket. Why do we have a 98% adoption rate in smartphones and most youth with 2 smartphones because they've got a WhatsApp line and another line with an inherent and built-in cost, but we're not using smartphone technology to access quality education? What is the real value of being able to buy houses? Why do we have a depreciating number of youth who see any value whatsoever in the accumulation of either wealth or assets? We need to be authentic in making sure that we're bringing up a generation of South Africans who truly, really do have the understanding on the importance of wealth and how that provides for generations to come. Thank you. The negative dialogue, well, we've all heard it. I kind of feel a little bit like a Facebook warrior. I spend half of my life on Facebook talking to people about don't leave South Africa, don't diss South Africa, don't put us down. Never before, and we've worked in the UK, we work in the United States, we've worked in France and Italy, we've had offices in Australia, New Zealand. I have never heard a nation of people talk so negatively about their own home and their own country. It really is dire, and it's an indictment on our sense, our feeling of patriotism, perhaps, but more so, perhaps it talks to our feeling of hopelessness, like we're not in control of the trajectory of where we're going. People are leaving in droves. They're leaving apparently due to BEE. They're leaving due to safety and security. The human psyche says or suggests that you need to justify why, and therefore the ongoing dialogue, even once people have left, is so negative. You don't see South Africans buying goods and services. It's interesting when you go to countries like Australia, they buy Australian, they wear Australian, they are very, very, very pro their own country and making sure that they try and use Australian service providers wherever they can. Our own sense of patriotism isn't there to that same extent. And yes, and yet when we talk to internationals who come out here on work contracts for 3 years, they argue it's one of the best countries in the world. So at some point, our dialogue has become so incredibly negative that it's almost self-fulfilling. Instead of focusing on what we can do to fix it, we focus incessantly on where it's all going wrong. It's our blame culture, which exacerbates that sense of despondency. It exacerbates and leaves wide open holes for political parties to push us further apart. And I think that really there comes a time what we need to do is we all need to argue and say, what is our role in taking the trajectory of South Africa forward? I argue that there are very few countries in the world, if you're between the ages of 15 and 85, where you literally and seriously can play a role in the future trajectory of this country. And I guess it's up to each of us individually and as corporate citizens to say, what will my role be? And if each of us is trying to do one thing each day, that we start to shift that dialogue, to encourage inward investment, to create positive sentiment, and at least do our bit. Thank you. I'm almost finished. I know I'm taking time. So community development, and very quickly, and I'm jumping into some solutions. Community development solutions are designed in boardrooms. It's amazing. A board sits around the table and they decide on what's best for the community. We roll it out very quickly. We knock in a billboard and we tell people what a wonderful job we're doing, and we wonder why the community isn't more grateful. I argue again, we go back to dignity, we go back to authenticity, and we go back to the most important issue, which is that dependence is not empowerment. If I stick up an incubator and give everybody a laptop and a tiny bite-sized contract, and I make sure that you've got a home for the next month, and I call you an SMME and I showcase you to the world, you're a charity. You're not in business until you start to buy goods and services. You're not in business until you realize that the people that you buy your raw product and input stock from also rely on you as much as you rely on your clients. And so we need to shift that thinking. Communities are meaningful. If you look at some of the social media posts, there's around 21 million South Africans living in townships at the moment, with a township economy estimated to be around 200 billion rand a year in contribution to the GDP. But more importantly, those people are the root of social security, because they all come from areas or have feeder areas that they talk to around a sense of optimism or not. And so we need to create a structure where we are simply go back to the basics of being authentic. If we're putting ownership trusts together in mining and agriculture, then we should be providing financial education to the beneficiaries of those trusts. The difference between profits, dividends, and disbursements or distributions to beneficiaries in a trust needs to be authentically understood if we want to do the right thing. Otherwise, we create expectations that we cannot fulfill, and that in itself is probably irresponsible, and it poses enormous risk. So we've taken on the role of doing municipalities' jobs. When we build clinics and schools and hospitals and upgrade roads, we don't do it in collaboration with the municipality. We don't train the municipality and build capacity within that municipality. We do it for them. And we call that altruism, but in actual fact, there's a significant price of that, and that is the price of dependence. And the price of dependence directly influences social instability. Thank you. So what is the solutions? Collective, meaningful engagement around industry solutions. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. I've just jotted down a few ideas and projects that we're working on. So focus on action. funding, investors, government, business, SMMEs, municipalities. Without a fail, we work with COGTA. We're an implementation partner to COGTA. We work with Corporate South Africa. We work with communities and tribal leaders. Everybody, actually, when we pull them in around the table, they might verbalize it differently, but has the same requirement. They have the same desire, which is to create social stability. It's to create jobs. It's to see economic growth. It's to meaningfully participate. And it's to see that all of us are in a situation where we can benefit from the commercial and economic growth that is derived from our coordinated activities. I don't understand why it feels as though there's such a huge disconnect, when in actual fact, when we bring dialogue together, we're actually all very connected around the same desires and the same wants. We need to hold businesses, municipalities, government and constituencies responsible and accountable for impact. We should no longer be impressed by activity. I don't want to see billboards that say 10,000 youth have been put into artisanal programs. I want to know how many of them are working. I want to know how many are paying taxes. I want to know how many of them are paying for their school fees as a result of this investment in their education and learning. And perhaps we need to take longer to do things, but focus on being a little bit more authentic around what we're doing and how we're doing it. We need to take longer term views as opposed to instant gratification views, and make sure that we're held accountable and responsible for every single constituent in South Africa to play a meaningful role. The taxi industry, we all argue about taxis. It costs the insurers 9 billion rand a year, approximately, according to the last reports we read, which was about 3 years ago. If we were to subsidize youth getting to work, wouldn't it put more youth into internships and programs? It would save them approximately 1,000 rand a month on average, and we could use it as a vehicle to drive vehicular safety and reduce the number of accidents through driving roadworthiness and licensed drivers on the road. Thank you. Some other examples, for example, I see a report that was published a couple of weeks ago about water treatment and water infrastructure and our crumbling water infrastructure. It says that we need 8 billion rand to fix it across 850 plants. I have to say that when I work out the maths of 8 billion divided by 850, and I know that it's not that simplistic, but you're looking at an average of 9.5 million rand per plant. If I were to go and ask businesses around that area to each contribute 10,000 rand, and I was able to gather 1,000 businesses within each area to contribute 10,000 rand, we would have the budget. If we were using our skills development and learning budgets and the plethora of CETA funding in order to structure learnerships and employ engineers who are retired with strong water treatment experience and bring them back into South Africa in order to execute these kind of projects, we could provide coordinated work and investment. And all of this counts on a BEE scorecard. All of these solutions lie within our own control, providing we collaborate, providing we invest wisely, and providing we take a longer term view on authentically being part of South Africa's transformation. We're working with an organization that provides integrated solutions like the pothole patrol that's been implemented. Every time I drive past pothole patrol, I give them and a thumbs up because I love them. But they're only implementing in Johannesburg at the moment. But there are solutions of that nature that are scalable across the whole country, where we become active participants in our own trajectory and our own issues. And we've got a client that's in large scale. In fact, one of the largest solutions providers in facilities management and catering solutions, etc., that has proactively put an integrated solution to go in and develop existing farmers around mining communities, so that and cleaning solutions and security solutions, so that as these mines are able to start to buy these services on tenders, the community members are ready. We would be surprised at what can be achieved. We were called in by one of the largest sugar associations in South Africa because their communities were uprising and rattling the cages. And we went in to diffuse it and ran a series of workshops explaining what was required for the community to bid for tenders within that particular enterprise. Without fail, we presented to more than 180 different clusters and groups on behalf of that entity around their communities. without fail, the response we got was, why didn't they tell us before what they needed us to achieve in terms of tender requirements and bid expectations? Now that we know we'll meet it, it completely diffused the environment. So we're so busy with our guards up saying they will conform and they must comply, and we cannot find small black suppliers because they don't meet our quality standards. Do we lower our guards enough to meaningfully engage? Are we authentically making sure that they're given the lead up time to make sure that they can get their houses in order to authentically engage? I think Einstein said, if you do the same thing again and again, it's the first sign of insanity. So we need to rethink our solutions and our operating norms and our standards, because if we do business in exactly the same way, but expect a different result and an outcome, we will be perpetually disappointed amongst a society that is increasingly disenfranchised and therefore a risk for all of us. Thank you. So from an ExCo accountability, there are community officers in every mine. The nicest people, we work with lots of them. Generally, they're social workers, and they really do care about the communities in which they support. But they are under-equipped with the commercial skills to drive solutions and to coordinate projects and programs and support communities authentically. HR officers are often tasked with transformation targets when, in fact, what you need to be doing to drive transformation is planning for the future. Are we digitizing our world of work? Are we making sure that in the mining industry, we know we're going to automate our mines? We've known that for 15 years. Why are we not manufacturing the technology in South Africa? Why are we not now building the engineers to make sure that the next mine supervisor will be an electronic engineer? It won't be a shoulder with a clipboard. Have we pre-thought that? Have we collaborated and invested in we talk about localization. We talk about a government commitment of 200 billion rand. Are the mines all coming together to say, let's make sure that we're automating using South African technology? So the shift from mining jobs moves into manufacture jobs, the much needed retention of that earning capability for mine workers. The investment in people is the same. We claim back 85% of what is spent on skills development, and yet few of the companies that we engage do that. They don't claim the tax benefits and incentives and engage with the seaters. And really, we need to create the models that allow us to do the best job we possibly can at the lowest cost. We often argue and say, if your strategy isn't investment neutral, so you don't derive the right level of commercial return or rebates and offsets and tax deductions, then it's probably the wrong strategy and you need to rethink it. Push yourself in order to find the right strategy. Identify solar solutions and water solutions and include Black entrepreneurs. Make sure that when we're buying goods and services, we do so from a pre-qualified set of quality suppliers who can deliver at short notice to our front door. We don't need to stock goods. COVID has taught us that if there is a closure of the borders or there is an issue with customs or anything else happens for that matter, the first thing that happens is the price goes up because of currency fluctuation. And the second thing that happens is we stand in line. Surely if that isn't a motivation to localize, which is what BE's been telling us to do for 12 years, then what will be? So finding people that are close to our vicinity, that are quality, that are competent, that are eager and robust and able to work, that's a business imperative. Yes, it happens to also give us points on our BE scorecard, but it should be our ethos as to how we do business. Thank you. Developmental budgets. Okay, I'm going to jump through all of this because I'm mindful of time, but creating emerging suppliers, recycle, repurpose, reuse, the amounts of times we've gone in to develop a BE strategy. And the first thing we look at is which are the assets that are fully depreciated on in your financials that are sitting lying around and that we can use. And the second thing is what waste do you produce? Because one man's medicine is another man's poison or the other way around. It's really important that what we're doing is looking at what we need to achieve in business and coordinating. There is no longer the room, the opportunity, or frankly, the economic muster for us to be siloing the different imperatives of transformation, ESG, and business good. We need to be sitting in an environment where we're putting those budgets together. We need to rethink our social and ethics committees and say, in actual fact, this probably becomes the most important strategic team in our business, is to make sure that we create social stability, that we are pulling our budgets together to spend less and achieve more meaningfully and authentically than what we've done in the past. Thank you. What are the emerging trends? And this is my last slide. Just transition, we're talking about that. ESG compliance under the greater sustainability banner, gender-based violence awareness and consciousness. We need to rethink our roles as board directors. We need to rethink our training and our learning and our thought processes. And it's interesting, out of the COP26, everybody said environmental, we've got ticked, but where is the social? And people said, well, we will develop social solutions, but your environmental solutions are your social solutions. So this notion that we must continue to silo what is commercial, what is governance, what is environmental, and what is social good. BE is one of the best policies in the world when it's implemented well. We have gone and trained the mining houses in Australia on how to implement BEE. We've spoken to US firms on how to implement BEE. We got involved in the UK at the London Olympics with writing the bid criteria for London Olympics. What did we use? BEE. If we take the name away and start to look at it as a model to make sure that South Africa is aligned to be commercially, environmentally, and socially good, then we'll start to see the value and the power that comes with saying we're removing discrimination. We're being meaningful and authentic in the way in which we operate in our environments. And we're making sure that if there is an ability to merge budgets and be cost effective and deliver our goods and services and our business ethos in a way that is a responsible corporate citizen and commercially sound, we're going to use BEE as the model to do so. I understand the fatigue. I know that we've all come out of COVID, and I know that we're all sick and tired of hearing BEE as a swear word. But I argue whether we truly understand BEE enough to be able to innovate within it, and whether we've truly adopted the ethos, forget the terrible name, of saying, let's do business in the right way. Let's be an authentic part of South Africa's solution and trajectory. Thank you.
Thanks, Dionne. There's a few questions. There's about 3 questions in the Q&A at the moment. If anyone would like to ask a question, you're welcome to post it there, or you can raise your hand, and I'll help enable your speak functionality so you can ask live.
Okay, I think if I can, I'm going to go into Yashmita Naidu's question, which is advice for NGOs around corporates and having to comply with the same codes as corporates. Yashmita, one of the things just in that respect is there is a rule in the BE codes that refers to the pass-through principle. So it suggests that if you receive money and not all of it is your money, so you're taking a portion of it as your management fees, and the rest passes through in order to be distributed to a third party, then you can reduce your turnover to reflect the meaningful income that is yours. And I think this is a mistake where a lot of NGOs specifically are overstating their income, and they're counting it as the full funds that you receive, as opposed to the funds that you retain in order to manage the operations of your business. So that's one practical tip that I can give you. The other advice from an NGO perspective would purely be to say, look at the way in which businesses contribute, and potentially contribute through a trust of some sort or third-party vehicle, so that you're not discriminated by excessive budgets and objectives. And the last tip that I would give you is that by your very nature, everything an NGO does is fulfilling the objectives and intentions of BEE. So a lot of the work that you do on a day-to-day basis can be counted on a BEE scorecard. And I would suggest that you look at that and see how you are able to deliver those services. I hope that helps. Pami, in terms of organizations ticking the boxes, sure. There's a lot that we see on a basis, on a regular basis, in respect of last minute decisions which are taken. And very importantly, what we've learned when we start the process of BEE, the very first thing we do is we do what we call an education and engagement, an E&E session with the board. If the board won't give us the audience to be able to talk about their business strategy and where is the business going and what are your burn issues and how can BEE support those burn issues, if we're not able to have that workshop at a strategic level, we would prefer not to work with that company, purely because BEE is an ethos. So if I want to achieve it meaningfully, then I cannot come in at the operating level. I can start to work with your stream leaders once we've developed the right strategy. But if I can't prove to a board where BE holds value in terms of the business strategy, then we're probably a bit broken in our ability to implement before we've even started. And I think that's probably the dilemma, is that not enough boards have given the time and the dialogue to really understand it meaningfully and understand it well. And therefore, more often than not, it is ticked as a scorecard. It's also communicated as a scorecard by the very parties that have designed that policy, unfortunately. And so it's communicated badly in the first instance, it's understood badly in the second instance, and so it doesn't really get given the right level of implementation that it should. So you're absolutely right, and what we need to do is escalate that to the board level and escalate BE to the level that it deserves in terms of strategy. Okay, Anthony, misalignment of the organizational vision. Could it be that people have different perspectives on how to implement solutions? Absolutely. I think that if anything comes out of this conversation, if you take a look at how broad BE is, we look at your ownership of your local structure, and your ownership is very much, when we take a look at ownership, about saying who adds value at an ownership level. Traditionally, we would do an ownership deal because we wanted to access new market share or product diversification or expand into different markets or access investment. Only in BEE do all of those good commercial drivers go to one side. So we need to be doing ownership transactions for exactly the same reasons that we would do an ownership transaction ordinarily. And then we need to find the right BEE partner in order to achieve that strategic objective. Management control is not about the visibility of women or Black people or people with disabilities. It's 2022. Surely by now, in an unemployment market of beyond 50%, we're sitting in a situation where we should be employing based on who's the right person for the job. And if there's an absence of skills, any business in the world should be saying, well, let's invest in the skills pool in order to mitigate the risk of not being able to find people or the increased cost of acquiring people when we do need them. So the point is that if we look at the imperative and the intent of BEE, how you get there and how you achieve the strategy is entirely yours. Each organization should have a strategy that is suited to their business and their strategy and their commercial drivers. It is individual at each level, but you need a deep understanding in order to innovate within what that looks like. And I think that's where we need to apply our minds and work a little bit harder, is in understanding it at a deeper level. Anusha, how can boards be held more accountable in addressing the BEE challenges? Sure. Again, I do think that the Social and Ethics Committee probably needs to carry a little bit more weight. I also think that that it needs one person, whether that's an independent non-exec or whether that's the chair or the CEO. We've got a couple of clients where I deal directly with the CEO and I meet regularly with the CEO to give him feedback on what's happening in the business. They take personal ownership of the BEE journey. Not only do they do things more meaningfully, but I tend to find that the whole business dialogue shifts. People come to us and say, if we were to do this, couldn't we make sure that this was done in a way that drives social good? So I think that we need to be holding CEOs accountable for understanding BEE and taking it seriously enough to want to be a positive part of South Africa's trajectory and feeling that environmental social governance BEE issues are important enough to give them the right place on the agenda from a board meeting perspective. And then I think from a corporate governance perspective, obviously, we need to make sure that we are authentically holding board committees and subcommittees accountable for their measurement and reporting. How can we...
Before you go
Yes.
to Andrew, Lisa has got her hand up for a while. So Lisa, do you want to ask your question? And then we'll take Andrew's, which is a nice one, I think, to end on.
Sure. First of all, thank you, Dionne. I think this has been the most unbelievable presentation. You've hit on all the points so succinctly.
Thank you.
And I think this whole point about ESG being part and parcel of the corporate entity is essential, and the fact that it can't be silent. My question really comes back to your whole discussion about education and where corporates stand. And I agree with you in terms of tertiary education, but do you not think that corporates should start also looking to filter it down into secondary education, because our schooling system leaves a lot to be desired in many, many areas. Is there a role to play which would not only facilitate BEE in terms of the broader thinking about BEE, but also raise the standards of understanding for the people who are struggling so much? Because, as you say, you talk about the black tax, but if you're at school learning about how to be a meaningful member of society, not just the rote learning that is so much part of our system.
I think it's a great question. Yeah, I mean,
Well,
I think that to answer your question, never mind tertiary, secondary, I think we need to go right the way back to the beginning of school. I find it fascinating when we do rural development programs, we talk to 18-year-olds and say, what about a career in mining? And they say, nah, my dad worked under the mine. I don't want to work under the mine. The understanding that you could be a metallurgist or a mining engineer or a mine manager, etc., isn't there. The understanding of career. And this is where the same cycles go around again and again and again and again. So we really need to go back to the whole education system and look at early childhood development. The cost of, while you are working on a mine, and often the husband and wife will now work on a mine because of the way that mining communities are formed, the child that is left at home is often left at home in a shack. Those early childhood centers are, never mind not having a good meal, they don't have a quality developmental phase from that 0 to 7 years phase is also severely lacking. And so if we wish to see change, we really have to take 15 to 25-year views on saying, what are we going to achieve? And if we create a baseline as a starting point and track our progress on an annual basis, then we can start to meaningfully say, does this make an impact in the environment we're in? But to answer your question, we need to go back to zero, actually. We need to go back to making sure that children are stimulated right at the very beginning if we wish to change the next generation of youth and make sure that they work ready.
Cool. Thanks, Dionne. Yoshmitha's also got a hand raised again. So Yoshmitha, I'm not sure if you have another question, if you can unmute.
Hi, Dionne. I asked the second question, but I think you might have missed it after seeing my first one. I guess my question is, as an NGO, I'm just trying to unpack why corporates are so reluctant to partner with NGOs who are already based in communities and are already doing the capacity building. I find that they tend to hold their cards very close to their chests, and they prefer to do it themselves and hire an entire team to do the work for them, as opposed to considering partnering with NGOs that are locally based, that have good insights into the community and what their issues are. So I'm just trying to figure out how we can tackle that one, especially in terms of ESG as well as in BBBEE.
So I think, Yashmita, there's a couple of issues you raise. And certainly I always say to clients, don't buy a dog and then the dog sleeps on your pillow at night and you're standing outside at the gate barking as people go past. So if we're going to say we're getting involved in community development, then the community should be driving your community development. It's so amazing that we feel that the community is amazing and they're unbelievable and they're such an intrinsic part of our business, but we don't trust them enough to give them the responsibility to deliver their own solutions. And I think that's, as I said in my earlier point, where the distrust creeps in is that when we do community development, one of the first things we do is we audit who are the NGOs, what are the current programs, what are the current government initiatives that are operating in the area, and how do we enhance, improve, or participate in them so that we're not perpetually reinventing the wheel. We do this at a political level as well. We make great progress in a ministry and a new minister arrives, and then the new minister's got to get rid of all the old and bring in all new. And so we live in this constant phase of reinventing the wheel and we don't move forward. So to gain the momentum that is much critically needed, again, it comes down to saying that we shouldn't be taking on responsibility for the community. We should be working with the community, and the community includes the NGOs that are currently operating within that environment because they're an intrinsic part of that structure.
Oh, thank you, Dionne. There's 2 more questions in the Q&A.
Right. Okay, Andrew, I think your question was how, as directors and ordinary citizens, can we promote sensible and practical views to a much wider audience. I'm hoping, Andrew, that we can start a movement of active citizenry where we just kind of collaborate around doing the right things. One of the things I've learned, and I've been in development now for 24 years, is that you think you know the answer until the next project you roll out, and then you realize you never know the answer. So the work that we do in transformation is inherently dynamic. And, you know, I think for those people who work in any kind of environment, we know that something that works consistently well has to perpetually be reviewed. The model that we use up in Northwest isn't the same model that we can apply in Richards Bay. The communities around the Siyakha sugar mills is very different to the expectations of a community based in Khayelitsha. So I think that we do need to encourage a dialogue. I'm hoping that as an outcome of sessions like these, we can start to question more and read more and understand more deeply. And within our own environments, start to put some questions out and do a lot more research. But I think collaboration is 100% key. And themed collaboration, we've got energy challenges and education challenges and social stability challenges and food and poverty alleviation. All of those challenges present significant opportunity. And without fail, when we come around a table and facilitate a conversation with stakeholders, they sit with the solutions themselves. They just haven't communicated well. So I think, Andrew, to shorten my answer to your question, communication is probably the key. Anthony, your question around how do we change a scarcity mentality to an abundance, which is absolutely the core of the challenge, and you're 100% spot on. You know, I ride a motorbike and I go off-roading and we go and do trips across South Africa, and we live in really one of the most beautiful countries in the world. And if you've ever had the opportunity to travel, you will know this about South Africa, that it is spectacular and abundant. We have great rail infrastructure. Does it need work? It does. Great. How do we come together and make that happen? Why? Because the same companies that are using that railway line have also got budgets to do something about it. The communities along that railway line wish to achieve something about it. And so if we were to bring all of those parties together, I think we would be amazed at what we can achieve. But how do we shift the scarcity to abundance dialogue? I think it comes back to communication. I think that every person, hopefully in the room today, will walk away talking positively about South Africa, and that's where it starts. And the other thing is, you will amaze yourself. Go onto the Cosmo City Rocks Facebook little page, go onto the Khayelitsha Facebook page, understand what's happening on the ground. Sometimes we're so busy complaining around a dining room table, having our beautiful, delicious, warm meal, that we forget how the world works out there. The notion of this South African society and its makeup, I think, is very out of touch with actual fact how the society and its makeup look. I think that if we can get momentum and a movement created around wanting to see a better country and asking ourselves what we can do, I think that there's power in numbers, and we have numbers. If nothing else, we have lots of numbers. Ilana, funding is a big requirement for SMMEs. How do we find relevant assistance for businesses, for general businesses as well? You know, what's funny is that we have an ecosystem of about 4,500 SMMEs that we develop and work with at any given time. And a lot of the funding applications which are forwarded to us, please can you help us to find funding? In actual fact, it's a finance issue, not a funding issue. So because I don't collect my debtors on time, and because I give my suppliers, I pay COD, but in actual fact, my clients are allowed to pay me 90 days because I'm intimidated by contract negotiation. My cash flow is terrible. I don't have a relationship with my bank. I'm not tracking my management accounts. I don't have great budgets. So in actual fact, in order to apply for funding, you've got to have great financials, which is ironic, because once we've cleaned the financials, a lot of them don't need funding. And I think that there's plenty of business support out there. There's also plenty of unemployed South Africans who have had to rethink what they do in their lives and how they will work as retired individuals. And again, I think that if we can just ask the local shop owner down the street if we can help help if we're a bookkeeper with getting his financials done every month end. It's amazing that when you're busy, how further opportunity comes your way. So I think that funding is a big requirement, development is a big requirement, but again, we must take the community rule of not telling SMMEs what they need and rather asking them what they want, and then putting ourselves in a situation where we can provide it. Okay, I think that's me. Vicky?
Thank you so much, Dionne, for an amazing presentation. If I'm looking at the chats happening right now in the chat room there, I think everybody has mentioned that this was such an insightful and awesome discussion that you've raised. I think you've definitely hit a lot of light bulbs and hit a lot of thinking, and people want to share this. So the video of the webinar will be shared with everybody that's in attendance, and it will go up on our YouTube page. So you're more than welcome to share this and I think spread the word wide and far. And I think definitely look out for the space. We'll definitely try and do a bit more with Dionne on the topic, and, you know, trying to increase the awareness, like you mentioned here, you know, what can we do as a group to achieve some of the solutions that you've mentioned here. So thank you to everyone joining us this morning. Do look out for our other events happening during the month, and we'll see you all again next month for our next Boardroom Bites at 9.